In this video, we're going to take a look at the BluePrint sidebar stack and the things that we can do with it. Let's start by dropping a sidebar onto the page, and you can see that essentially a sidebar is a two-column stack. And in fact, you can use sidebar as a very powerful two-column as well. So we'll start by looking at its basic two-column type features, and then we'll look at the extra things that it can do to make sort of side menus and more traditional sidebars as people may think of them. So as we look down the settings, we can see there's a information at the top, and we can add backgrounds to our sidebar using the ProStyles child stacks, just like a lot of my other stacks. And it says we use the background child for the main content area and the overlay for the sidebar area or the aside. So you can see if we just add a background and an overlay, we get our colors that way. And of course, this means that we can use gradients, images, CMS images, and everything that we can use in the other stacks that support the ProStyles child stacks. So that out of the way, let's have a look at the actual column layout settings. So the first thing you see is that we have 3 breakpoints available: medium, large and XL. You don't have to use all the settings for these. We can define large and extra large sizing if we need them. The only one that is mandatory is our small setting, which is when it stacks. Now, if you don't want it to stack, you can just change the medium breakpoint to 0, of course, just like any other breakpoint control system. The basic functionality of sidebar in terms of it being a column is that we can define the width of one of the aside, and the other column will take up whatever space is needed. So if we change this width to 60%, which is it defaults to percentages, then it obviously behaves as you'd expect. Let's just set it to 50-50 for now, so it's like 2 equal columns. In addition to normal column behavior though, we don't have to have it as percents. We could make it a fixed width. And if you're making a menu up the side of a vertical menu up the side of a page, you may well want this as a fixed width. We can of course define different sizes for different widths. So we can have a 30% for large screens, and we could define an extra large if we wanted as well. And as you see, it fluidly resizes between these different sizes. So it's very flexible as a column. So let's get on and put some content in here. I've got a header stack here, and let's put another one in the aside, just so that when it stacks we can see which columns are which. Let's put a small paragraph in there, and let's put a couple of bigger paragraphs into the main content area. Just duplicate those. If we now preview that, we've got our main content and a 30% side content. And you can see by default the side content goes on top. That's because it's a sidebar. It's a bit opposite to columns, but we can control that here. If we want it to go on the bottom, then it goes on the bottom, so the aside's at the bottom now. If we want to hide the second column content completely for small screens, we can. So we can go back up, and it appears again when we get above our medium breakpoint. Let's just turn that back on for now, and we can say whether we want the side content on the left or on the right. So that's all very obvious and very simple. We've already looked at the widths, and you may want a divider and gutters. The gutter control is again very easy to operate. We just increase the gutter, and we can have a divider if we want as well. So all very, very simple. You can even have dotted and dashed dividers if you really want. So that's all as you would expect. We can do a few other nice things with it. Let's put some backgrounds on it again, just so that we can see the extent of the columns. Just select our sidebar and go back to preview. Now you'll notice by default always these columns are equal heights, so your backgrounds will always be equal. This is just pure CSS, so there's no messing around and it's very easy to control. You'll notice that the gutter pushes the backgrounds, so if you want the backgrounds to meet, just turn the gutter off. You can see the divider. You can just see the divider still there. Let's turn the divider off for now, just so that it doesn't change the color. And we've now got two different backgrounds. So when it stacks, obviously you can see the backgrounds as it stacks. Now we do have a stacked gutter setting as well, so we can actually put a space between them when it stacks if we want. This is quite useful if instead of backgrounds you had borders, because we can put borders around each column to get rid of the backgrounds. And if we go down to the styling area in the settings, we can put some padding, we can put a border around our side. Let's just make that sort of 3 pixels and give it 10 pixels rounding. We can then do the same for our content area if we want. And this is when we really want gutters again now, because you see it doesn't look too attractive when they join like that. So let's just add a bit of gutter. Now this gutter at the moment is in pixels, but we can have it in percentages if you want it to be a bit more fluid. And this is where you'll see that the stack gutter is useful, because it stops the borders butting up against each other when it's stacked. If we turn the stack gutter off, we get that sort of effect. So very, very simple controls. And let's just make this desktop size again. We can of course have backgrounds as well as borders. Obviously the background will take on the border radius shape, and we can mix and match whichever we want. So if you remember, we said that these things are equal height automatically. That gives us the option to do some useful things with the content in each of the content and aside areas. If you look at the settings for each of them, we have a content as flex column setting and a sidebar as flex column setting. If we just enable that, then we get a vertical align control. So we can make the aside content centered, or we can make it aligned to the bottom with respect to the other one. So just see that obviously looks just as you expect. Notice that the borders will still be full height. You probably wouldn't be using the borders in this situation. Let's just turn the borders off just to make it look a bit nicer. And we'll leave that background on just for now, but we'll turn the border off the content area as well, like so, and the rounding. Now, not only can this side be aligned, but the content area can be aligned as well, just the same control. So if we say we want the content centered, then that will center the content. Now, bear in mind, any alignment, just like anything else, is going to be aligned when there's space to align into. So that's not going to make any differences at all, because the stack is getting the height of the longest content. If we were to move some of these pieces of text over to the side, then you see immediately now the content area is centered, and it's going to look just the same in preview. When it stacks, the centering is automatically cancelled and everything behaves just like normal. Now we'll put these back for a second. One thing that will definitely come up, particularly with making sidebars, is that you don't want all the content centered. So if we turn the sidebar area to align top, that's the content area, well, we'll leave that top as well. Turn the sidebar area to align top, and it must be set to sidebar as flex column, and it must be set to align top to do this. But then imagine we had a button, and let's just get rid of that warning message. So we'll just quickly center this button, and this may be a buy now button or a find out more or whatever, but we want this, instead of it being with the rest of this content, we want it aligned at the bottom, which historically is an awkward thing to do, but not anymore, because we just drop it into a blueprint, and then right at the bottom in the advanced settings for blueprint, all you need to do is click auto vertical align in flex column sidebar. Okay, so now when we look, the button's at the bottom. It's got its bottom margin on it, so if we just take the bottom margin off the button, then it will be right at the very bottom, like so. How easy is that? What about if we want something in the middle? Well, there's only ever one setting for this, and it just depends how you build it. So if we put another one in, it's pretty logical, and we now turn this one onto auto vertical align. So we would assume that this one would be centered and this one would be bottom when they're both set to vertical align automatically, and there you go, they are. Now if you want something at the top, say we want this header to be at the top, let's just pull it out of that blueprint. So now we've got, let's get rid of it, I duplicated it. So now we've got a blueprint set to auto align, another one set to auto align, and then our header at the top, and then we've got top content, center content, and bottom content. Easy as you like. So hopefully all the difficulties of alignment of things in that respect will go away, and exactly the same works in the content area if that was taller. So that's a very, very easy way to do it, and it just depends on how many you've got. If you put one in, it will go to the bottom. If you put two in, you'll get the middle and the bottom. So sort of works as you'd expect. Now, what else can we do with columns? If you wanted to nest blueprints sidebars, you can do. So if we put another sidebar in here and we set it to 50% width, then we've now got, if we just make sure that instead of being that this is the first one again now, so let's make that 33.3, so that's a third. And these two are going to take up half of the 2/3, so we'll get 3 equal columns that way. You probably wouldn't usually want to do this because it's a bit of a faff compared to using a 3-column stack, but there we have 3 columns. One thing that is nice though is that you can wrap at different points. So we could say we want this sidebar to wrap at, let's just increase the median breakpoint to say 860 pixels. So this content here now is going to go above at 860 pixels. Just reduce the amount of it a bit. This one is going to still wrap at 640. So now at 860, this one goes on top, and we're just left with our 50-50 split on the second one, and then at 640 that one wraps. So you can do some quite useful things by nesting them. The final thing we're going to talk about is building a sidebar using the full height setting. So this is more like a menu sidebar type application, and for that we're just going to switch to the page from the demo project. And what we've got here is we've got a sidebar, and there's quite a lot of content in it, so let's just collapse the content so that you can see what we've got. The side area is the bit shown in black, and the main content is everything else on the page. So we're going to use this to wrap the entire page, and to do that we're going to set down at the bottom, there's a height, and you can see if I turn it off and back on again, we've just got a setting that says full browser when not stacked. So I'm going to turn the scroll bars back on for a minute. So all this gives us is, just like we saw before, it gives us a sidebar, which is here, which we've got on the left, and then it gives us our content area. So we've got our whole page inside the content area. And in this case, I've got it a fixed width, so it starts off that wide, and then at a break point somewhere there, it just gets slightly narrower and the buttons get a bit smaller. And then on mobile, it wraps and it goes to the top, and it actually turns into a menu. That's not the sidebar, that's button bar, but anything will work in here. And you can see we've got a few nice features as well that make it a bit more interesting. So when we hover the sidebar, it recolors the icons, so they're grey and then coloured, and we can slide the text in as well. So let's have a look at how we did that. So we'll come down to our width settings first. You can see that we've defined a width of 100 pixels and then 120 for larger screens, and that was just that slight change in size we saw to accommodate the icons. So pretty much as we saw in the other example. We've got no gutters, no dividers. We've got a black background on our sidebar, on our side area. We've got no background on the content area. They're all at the bottom of the stack. We won't scroll all the way down to there because that's where the child stacks are. And then all we do is hit the full browser height. Now if we turn that off, we see that the sidebar has become the height of the content area. So our sidebar is scrolling, which is not what we want. So that's just as when we were using it in columns, the stack behaves like a normal stack. So this 100% height is the key to make pages that have a fixed sidebar. So all we do is we make the sidebar stack the height of the page, and then it allows the content area to scroll. And this will happen with them set to the default settings. So the stack's not moving, but the content area is. And if you're using Chroma as a menu in here, that will work, and you can just set it to BluePrint as its parent instead of the page. So all the scrolling behavior will still work just as it does normally. The only thing you've got to be careful of using this setting is putting stuff above it and below it. You can do with it as it's set at the moment, but obviously you're going to have a sort of a double scroll. The page will scroll down to this area, then this bit will scroll, and then it'll scroll again. So it's probably not the best user interface. Now the only other thing to note is that there's a setting here that says no scroll bars on the body element. Now at the moment I've got my scroll bars set to auto, and if I just change them in my preferences to always, so now all our apps will show a scroll bar all the time. You see the scroll bars appeared there. If you have this set, sometimes you can get a double scroll bar, which doesn't look that great. Now scroll bars are controlled by whatever browser you're viewing in. There's not a lot web pages can do about them, but I have provided some custom settings here that you can get rid of them. If you say no scroll bars on the body element with this setting down here, and there's a big warning, read the tooltip, then you will only ever get a single scroll bar. And it's absolutely fine to do this as long as you've not got any content below or above this stack. This stack has the whole page in it, because what this setting does is it stops the overflow on the main part of the page, on the body and on the HTML element, which is perfectly valid to do, but obviously nothing outside of this stack is going to scroll. So just be careful with that setting, and as ever, read the tooltips. And finally, we've got our little animations, and the animations are quite simple. We have two very simple settings in the hover for the sidebar aside. we can either slide in content or we can add color to content. And it's deliberately kept simple for that reason. So at the moment, I've got it set to slide in anything with a CSS selector of .ppro, which is paragraph pros, which is what these are. So these are a bit more advanced settings. You've got to know what the selector is of the thing you're trying to slide in. But if you put something in a CSS box, then you can slide in anything you like if you don't know the selector, because you give it the class name yourself. The add color will just apply a monochrome filter to anything when it's not hovered. And at the moment, these icons are all done in a BluePrint SVG stack, and I happen to know that that has the class of blue SVG. If you didn't know that, it doesn't matter because it has a custom class setting anyway. Most of my stacks have custom class settings. So if you give the stack a custom class, you can use its selector here. And remember, these are selectors, so you will need the dot. They're not class names. But that also means that you can use IDs as well. So if you wanted to, if you had something with an ID of, I'll find the hash, something with an ID of my image, then you would just put it with a hash in that setting. So again, bit more advanced, but a nice little feature just to augment menus, and I needed it for something, so you get it. And that really is Sidebar. I suggest you look at the demo project, which is what we're looking at here. This has got lots of examples. So there's a basic sidebar here about what we were talking about earlier. There's one with some colors showing the equal heights in operation, and then we've got a nested one like we saw before, and a bit of nesting with gutters and borders. So it's nothing really out of the ordinary. You build the stack just as you would build any column stack. It's only really the height setting in probably the rare cases when you want to use it to make a full page side menu on your site. Okay, thanks for watching, and there'll be more BluePrint videos very soon.